That August 12th dawned differently. The air had that smell of promise that only appears once a year, when it's your birthday, and you convince yourself that, this time, everything will be different. I got up early, as always, with a light heart. I put the white tablecloth on the table. I took out the dishes I only use on special occasions and baked my favorite cake, vanilla with walnuts, the recipe I learned from my mother. As the aroma filled the house, I smiled, imagining my son Andrew arriving with flowers and his wife Chloe laughing while I served the coffee. I spent hours preparing everything: the fresh juice, the snacks, the glasses. I even ironed my blue dress, the one Andrew always said made me look like an elegant lady. In my head, everything would be simple, intimate, and warm. Nothing luxurious, but full of love. When the clock struck 6, the sun was beginning to set, and the cake was ready. I placed 6 small candles on top, one for each decade I've lived, plus 2 for the extra years life has gifted me, and I sat down to wait. The house was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Every minute seemed to stretch. At 7, I sent them a message. "Everything is ready, kids. Come soon." The cake is getting cold. 20 minutes passed, then 30. At 8, the phone vibrated. I smiled when I saw Andrew's name, but the smile froze when I read the message. "Mom, we ended up going to dinner with friends at the Sun restaurant. Save the rest of the cake for us later. I'll call you tomorrow. Happy birthday. We love you." The world stopped. My body felt cold, my hands empty. I read the message again and again, as if the words could transform into something else. But they didn't. They were cold, impersonal, as distant as any random notification. I walked to the table, looked at the still intact cake, and for a moment I had the absurd hope that it was all a joke. But the silence answered me. The empty chair in front of me, the gleaming glasses no one would use, the fresh flowers I had bought that morning. Everything seemed to be mocking me. I sat down and watched the lit candles. The flames flickered, as if they were sad too. I took a deep breath, forced myself to smile, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Laura." And I blew out the candles alone. The smoke rose in slow spirals, filling the room with that sweet, melancholy smell of melted wax. In that moment, I understood something I had refused to accept for years. My son no longer lived in my world. And the worst part wasn't his physical absence, but his emotional distance, the kind built on excuses and new priorities. I cut a piece of the cake and tasted it. It was delicious, but it had no flavor. Sugar can't compete with loneliness. I got up, put the rest in the refrigerator, and stared at the neighborhood lights. In the nearby houses, I could hear laughter, dishes, life. In mine, only the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of a soulless "we love you." But before I continue, I'd like to know if you've subscribed to Grandma's Diary and if you like the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now, let's continue. I couldn't sleep that night. Andrew's message kept replaying in my head like a broken record. "Save the rest of the cake for us later." Later? After what? After my life? After my patience? After my years? At 2 in the morning, I got up and turned on the dining room light. The cake was still there, covered in plastic wrap. In its perfect silence, it seemed to be watching me. I approached it, ran my fingers along the edge of the plate, and felt the cold glass. Something inside me shattered with that touch. I started thinking about all the times I had been left waiting. When he was a boy and came home late from school, when he promised to visit and didn't. When he'd say, "Mom, I'll talk to you later," and months would pass without me hearing his voice. I had learned to justify everything. His work, his tiredness, his family, the rush. I always found a reason to keep believing he was still my son, that there was still a place for me in his life. But that night, between the silence and the smell of cake, I understood that excuses were no longer enough. That a mother's love also has an expiration date when it's fed only on memories. I sat at the table, took a sheet of paper from my notebook, and began to write. I didn't know what I wanted to say yet, but my hands didn't stop. The words came out on their own, as if someone else were dictating them. When you blow out the candles alone, you don't make wishes, you ask for explanations. That was the first line. And after it, a torrent of thoughts, complaints, and truths I had never said out loud. I wrote for hours until the morning light crept through the curtains. When I finished, I folded the paper and left it under the cake plate. I didn't know why I was doing it. I only knew that this letter wasn't a goodbye, it was a seed. The next day dawned bright. I made coffee, combed my hair, and stared at the door. Mid-morning, I heard the sound of Andrew's car. For the first time, I didn't feel joy. I felt calm. I heard them come in, heard them laughing, heard Chloe say, "Oh, honey, I hope there's still cake left." I knew then that I didn't need to say anything else. Everything that needed to be said was already written. I took my coat, opened the back door, and left without a sound. I walked toward the street with a serene heart. Behind me, I left my house, the cake, the note, and an entire life of silence. That morning, I finally understood what it meant to blow out the candles alone. It wasn't resignation, it was a beginning. The morning air was cold, but it had a purity I hadn't felt in years. I walked aimlessly, without a warm enough coat, with only my small purse and the memories that weighed more than any suitcase. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I was fleeing from. From indifference, from being forgotten, from the echo of a loveless text message. As my steps echoed on the empty street, an image formed in my mind with painful clarity. My son Andrew's face when he was a boy. His cheeks were always stained with dirt and a smile. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a huge house and a cake every single day," he used to tell me, and I, naive, believed him. Back then, I still thought a son's love was eternal, that blood ties didn't grow cold with the years. I sat on a park bench, the dry leaves crunched under my shoes. I closed my eyes and went back to those years of struggle. When I was widowed, Andrew was barely 6 years old. His father's funeral was the longest day of my life. The friends left, the flowers wilted, and the silence left me alone with a child who didn't understand death. That night, I promised myself he would never lack anything. I worked every job I could. Cleaning houses, sewing uniforms, selling pastries. My hands, which had once only known the softness of home, learned to withstand the soap, the cold, and the fatigue. I never complained. Andrew was my motivation. Every dollar I earned, I saved in a jar for his future. When he got sick, I spent nights by his side, praying, fearing, promising. No exhaustion could stop me. I remember the first time he called me his hero. He was 12, and he gave me a handmade card, a crooked heart with my initials inside. I kept it for decades between the clean tablecloths, and I can still see his childish handwriting saying, "Thanks, Mom, for being my everything." How cruel time is when it erases those words. The years passed quickly. Andrew grew up, studied, went to college in the city. I stayed here, in the same house, with the same curtains, waiting for every call as if it were a letter from heaven. At first they were frequent. "Mom, I'm fine. Mom, I passed the exam. Mom, I miss you." But then the words became short, the calls rarer, and the voice more distant. Chloe appeared in his life when he was 28. I remember the day he introduced her to me. She was a pretty elegant girl, but with a look that didn't know how to see. She greeted me with an air kiss and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I, wanting to please, prepared a special meal, stew, homemade bread, and lemon pie. But they barely took a bite. "Mom's cooking," Andrew said, laughing. And Chloe laughed too. But it wasn't a sweet laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel small. That night, as I washed the dishes, I understood that something had broken irreversibly. Andrew wasn't just mine anymore. His world no longer had room for me, and the young woman by his side didn't see me as a mother, but as an uncomfortable shadow from the past. Still, I never stopped being there. When my grandson Samuel was born, I felt hopeful again. I knitted him blankets, bought toys, made soup for when Chloe said she was tired. But over time, the doors began to close. "Don't come over today, Mom," Andrew would say. "Chloe wants to rest." "You don't need to cook, Mom. We already ordered food." "Don't worry, Mom. We're fine." Every mom came with distance. Every sentence was another brick in the wall separating us. One day, I went to visit without calling first. I just wanted to see the baby. When I arrived, Chloe opened the door, her face tense. "Oh, Laura, we were just about to go out." I looked inside and saw little Samuel playing on the floor. "I just wanted to give him this," I said, holding out a small cake I had baked for him. Chloe smiled without looking at me. Thanks. We'll eat it later. And she closed the door gently. That image haunted me for years. My cake in her hands, her polite smile, and my grandson on the other side of the glass, oblivious to my presence. Now, sitting on that bench, I understood it had all been a slow, cruel process. Being forgotten doesn't happen all at once. It seeps in, it hints, it becomes a habit. Sometimes, the saddest thing isn't that they stop loving you, but that they no longer know how. I took the notebook from my purse where I had written the note the night before. I reread it slowly. The letters looked firmer than my hands. It was a simple letter, without resentment, but with truth. And in that truth, there was a plan. I wasn't planning to run away out of cowardice. No, I was planning to do it for dignity. I wanted them to understand what they had lost, not out of pity but out of awareness. I wanted them to feel the silence as I had felt it. Heavy, harsh, real. Because love, when given without being returned, becomes an empty mirror, and I no longer wanted to see myself in the reflection of abandonment. At noon I walked to the bus station. I bought a ticket with no fixed destination. The man at the counter asked me, "Where are you going, ma'am?" "To somewhere the silence sounds different," I replied. He gave me a strange look but didn't press. I sat by the bus window and watched the scenery pass. The stores, the wilted flowers at the market, the children with backpacks. Everything was moving away. For the first time in a long time I didn't feel fear. I thought of my husband, of how he always told me that love without respect withers. One day, Laura, love gets tired. And when it gets tired, it doesn't leave screaming. It leaves in silence. That day I understood his words weren't a warning. They were a prophecy. And as the bus pulled away, I swore I would never wait again. Because there are birthdays that aren't celebrated with cakes or candles, but with decisions. And mine had just begun. Sometimes, a single sheet of paper can say more than 1,000 reproaches. When I folded the note I had written the night before and placed it under the cake plate, I felt a strange, almost sacred calm. It was a calm that came not from forgiveness or anger, but from certainty. I knew that when they returned, they wouldn't understand a thing. They would look at that paper as if it were an old woman's eccentricity. But the words were written in ink that doesn't fade, the ink of accumulated silence. I left the house tidy. In the refrigerator, the cake covered in plastic wrap. On the table, 2 clean glasses, a pair of plates, and a candle I wouldn't light again. I walked to the door, looked one last time at my home, my small world, and whispered, "May the echo teach you what my voice could not." I closed the door slowly without looking back. That night the sky was clear, and the city slept under a silent glow. Meanwhile, at the Sun restaurant, Andrew was laughing. He had a glass of wine in his hand, and Chloe was taking pictures of him with her cell phone. "Come on, Smile," she said. "We'll send it to your mom later and tell her to come with us next time." Andrew let out a laugh. "Please, Chloe. You know if we invite her, she doesn't enjoy it. She always ends up talking about the past, about Dad, about how expensive everything is." Chloe rolled her eyes. "Yeah, well, older mothers are like that. They get stuck in the past." They ordered dessert, made a toast, and at 11 at night, they returned home. The laughter was still floating in the air when Andrew opened the door and turned on the dining room light. The scene froze them. The cake, perfectly placed in the center of the table, with a folded note beside it. "Mom," Andrew called out. Silence. Chloe looked around. Everything was tidy, impeccable, too impeccable. "She must be sleeping," she said in a casual tone, but her eyes revealed discomfort. Andrew approached the table. The candle, burned halfway down, still had a wisp of dry smoke. The plate in front of the chair was empty but clean, as if someone had washed it carefully. He picked up the note and opened it. His pulse quickened. A cake isn't always served to celebrate. Sometimes it's left on the table so someone will remember that love also grows cold. "When you return, don't look for me in the house. Look for me in what you stopped seeing." "What does this mean?" Chloe asked, moving closer. Andrew didn't answer. His throat tightened. He read the note again and again, trying to find some hint of irony, some trace of drama, but there was none. The letters were firm, careful. His mother's voice, written there, had a frightening serenity. Chloe frowned. Maybe she went to church or to town. You know how she is. Always so. Sentimental. "No," Andrew said in a low voice. My mother never leaves the house like this. She never leaves without telling me." He checked every room. Her bedroom was empty. Nothing was missing, except an old photo of the two of them that she always kept on her nightstand. The bed was perfectly made. On the pillow, an embroidered handkerchief with my initials, LT. Chloe tried to joke. "Don't get paranoid. I'm sure she just went to clear her head." "And she'd leave this note?" he asked, holding up the paper. "And the cake on the table?" The silence settled in again, thick, uncomfortable. Andrew looked at the cake, the same one his mother had made every year since he was a child. He remembered what she used to tell him. The secret to the flavor isn't in the sugar, but in the intention. For the first time in a long time, he thought about his mother's intention. What if the cake was more than just food? And what if the note wasn't a complaint, but a goodbye? The next morning, they returned at dawn. The house was the same. Not a dish out of place, not a piece of furniture moved. Everything breathed in almost ritualistic order. Andrew called the neighbors. No one had seen her leave. He called the police, who told him to wait 48 hours. Camila tried to stay calm, but her voice trembled when she said, "Maybe she went to see a friend, or to visit someone." "My mother doesn't have friends," Andrew replied, his face pale. "Since Dad died, all she had was this house. And me." He opened the refrigerator. The cake was still there. He took it out and put it on the table. He looked at the layers, the texture, the color. It was the same cake from his childhood, but now it had a different taste. A bitter taste, as if every bite hid a truth he never wanted to try. He left the note on the table next to the cake and sat down. Minutes passed, then hours. Chloe tried to distract him, but he wouldn't talk. "Andrew, please, you're exaggerating. This isn't the first time your mother has made drama." He looked up. His eyes were glassy. "You don't understand, Chloe. This time, it's not drama. This time, she's really gone." That night, while they were sleeping, Andrew woke with a start. He could have sworn he heard his mother's voice calling his name. He got up, went into the hallway, and the smell of freshly baked cake hit him suddenly. It was so real his heart leaped, but the kitchen was empty, only the echo of the clock and the note on the table. He picked it up again and noticed something he hadn't seen before, a line written on the back, in fainter ink. He read it in a low voice. "When silence weighs more than words, it's because someone finally decided to listen to it." The paper fell from his hands. Andrew sat on the floor, trembling. For the first time, he understood what his mother had tried to teach him. Abandonment also speaks. And that house, clean, tidy, and empty, was its voice. Meanwhile, I was already far away. The bus moved down the empty highway, and the morning sun lit my face. I looked out the window, remembering my son, imagining his reaction. Not with pleasure, but with resignation. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for remembrance. And deep down, I hoped that note, my note, would do what my words hadn't managed to do in years. That it would make him remember me not as a burden, but as a mother. I never thought absence could weigh so much. Silence has its own sound. The sound of footsteps that are no longer heard, the phone that doesn't ring, the still air in a house that finally stops pretending to be a home. As the bus pulled away from the neighborhood where I had lived most of my life, I looked out the window and watched my house grow smaller. As small as the space my son had reserved for me in his heart. I didn't bring much with me. A handbag, a change of clothes, my documents, and an old notebook. On its first page, written in my trembling handwriting, it said, "Don't try to understand my steps. Just listen to the noise your guilt makes when you walk over what you forgot." Meanwhile, in the city, Andrew was starting to panic. He had spent all morning calling hospitals, bus stations, police precincts. Nobody knew anything about me. The police told him to wait 48 hours before filing an official missing person report. But he couldn't wait. "She's not like that, Chloe. She wouldn't just leave without saying anything." He repeated it over and over. Chloe, for her part, tried to stay calm. "Andrew, she's 68 years old. Maybe she just needed space. You know how she gets with dates, with emotions. I'm sure she went to see a friend or to your father's grave. And why would she take her documents, money, and the picture she had of us?" he retorted, pointing to the empty shelf. "No, Chloe. She didn't leave to come back." For the first time in a long time, the pride in my son's voice broke. It wasn't anger, it was fear. I had arrived at a small bus station in a town 3 hours away. Nobody knew me there, and that gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. I checked into a simple boarding house. The owner, a woman with gray hair and a kind smile, offered me a room with a window facing the courtyard. "Traveling alone, ma'am?" she asked. "Yes," I replied with a tired smile. "I always have. I just didn't know it before." That night I slept deeply. No alarms, no messages, no anxiety of waiting for someone to remember me. I woke up early, made coffee, and wrote a letter. I didn't know if I would send it yet. "Andrew, my son, don't be scared. I'm not lost. I'm just finding myself. I've spent years waiting to be part of your life, and I forgot that I also had my own. Don't look for yourself in my absence. Look for yourself in your silence. There, you will know why I left." I folded it and put it in my pocket. Back at the house, Andrew was rummaging through drawers, papers, folders. Chloe watched him, not understanding the magnitude of his distress. "There's no reason for so much drama," she said. "She'll be back." "Will she?" he repeated with a bitter laugh. "You don't know her. My mother never did anything without a purpose." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if she left like this, it's because she wants us to find her, or to learn something by looking for her." Among the papers, he found an envelope with my handwriting. It wasn't a letter. It was an old receipt from the bank where I'd had my savings account. Chloe looked at it. "What does that matter?" "My mother always told me that savings are not to be touched, unless you're planning something serious." Andrew decided to go to the bank. The teller checked the record and looked up, surprised. "Mrs. Laura withdrew all her money 2 days ago," she said. "All of it?" "Yes, she signed for it herself, and she left instructions to transfer a portion of it to a law firm in the city." Andrew's heart sped up. Chloe turned pale. "Which lawyer?" "The document doesn't say," the teller replied. "Only an initial, M, and a delivery date for next week." They left the bank without speaking. Chloe was trembling. Andrew, however, walked with a strange calm. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Wait," he replied, not looking back. "My mother always keeps her promises, and if she said not to look for her, I won't, but that doesn't mean I won't listen." Meanwhile, in the town, I was walking through the market. I bought fruit, bread, and yellow flowers. Not to decorate, but to remember. Yellow flowers were my husband's favorite. I sat on a bench in front of the church and watched people pass by. No one recognized me. No one owed me anything. That freedom was a gift, but also a test, because as much as I wanted to feel calm, the emptiness was still there, throbbing. I remembered Andrew as a child, how he would grab my hand when we crossed the street. And I thought, when was the last time he looked at me with that trust? I couldn't remember. I returned to the boarding house at dusk. In the room, I had left the cake I'd brought with me. The last piece, the one I saved before leaving the house. I put it on the plate and looked at it for a long time. The sugar had hardened, the frosting had dried. Time had stolen its sweetness, just like it had stolen ours. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, "Love, when it's not shared, hardens just like old cake. It no longer nourishes, it hurts." I fell asleep with a calm heart. I knew that, one way or another, Andrew would understand. Days later, a neighbor called Andrew. "Your mother came to say goodbye before she left," she told him. "She left this for you." The envelope contained only a photo, Andrew as a child laughing with his face full of cake. On the back, in my handwriting, a few words. "Time doesn't erase love. It only reveals what we've turned it into." Andrew couldn't hold back the tears. For the first time, he understood what I always knew. There is no distance greater than the love taken for granted. That night, as I wrote in my notebook, I realized something. Revenge doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it educates. And my disappearance wasn't a punishment, it was a lesson. I wanted Andrew to learn to value what is lost when one confuses love with obligation. The cake on the table, the note, the silence. It had all been a map, and if he followed it with his heart, one day he would find me. Because, although he didn't know it yet, I hadn't gone far, just far enough for him to learn how to look for me. I always believed that written words held a power that time couldn't erase. That's why, for years, I filled my notebook with thoughts I never dared to say. It wasn't a diary of dates or routines. It was a refuge. On its pages I wrote what I couldn't shout: the exhaustion of being invisible, the sadness of waiting for calls that never came, the fear of dying without being remembered. That notebook was my silent companion, my confessional. I never thought my son would one day read it, but perhaps that was the destiny I had prepared for myself without knowing. 2 weeks after my disappearance, Andrew returned to the house, not out of habit, but out of necessity. He had tried to go on with his life, but the silence followed him like a ghost. He slept poorly, ate little, and every night he dreamed of my voice repeating his name. When he crossed the threshold, the smell of cake was gone. The house was permeated with that dry scent that memories leave behind when they wither. Chloe didn't come with him. She said she couldn't stand the sad energy. So he came back alone, for the first time in years. He walked to my room. The bed was still made, the air still. On the nightstand, under the embroidered cloth, he found the notebook. He recognized it immediately. He had seen it 1,000 times, but had never paid it any attention. He picked it up carefully, as if it were sacred. He sat on the bed, opened it, and began to read. Andrew, if you ever read this, it won't be out of curiosity. It will be because the silence has hurt you enough to want to understand it. His hands trembled. He turned the page. Being a mother didn't give me wings, son. It gave me roots. And those roots grew so deep that, sometimes, they buried me alive. But I never complained, because loving you gave me meaning even when life took my strength. Andrew closed his eyes. He could picture me writing that, with my glasses on, the lamp lit, the serene expression of someone saying goodbye without saying a word. He kept reading. I never wanted to be a burden in your life, but over the years I realized you were ashamed of me. You didn't say it, but I saw it in your eyes when I talked about simple things, or when you insisted on paying the coffee bill just so no one would notice you were with your mother. I learned to be quiet. I learned to smile. I learned to wait. But love, when it's not cared for, transforms. It no longer heals. It wounds. Andrew took a deep breath. He turned more pages. I remember when you were a boy, and you promised me you would never leave me alone. You were 6 years old, clinging to my skirt. That promise was my lighthouse, but adulthood came and the lighthouse went out. I don't blame you, son. We all grow up and look for our place. The mistake wasn't that you left, but that you left me waiting. The lump in his throat became unbearable. He closed the diary for a moment, put his hands to his face, and cried. Not a loud cry, but a contained one, like someone who finally understands what was always right in front of him. When he regained his composure, he opened it again. Among the final pages, he found something different: a list. Dates, places, names. Small notes written with precision. May 9. Transfer completed. May 11. Visit confirmed with lawyer MD. May 13. Bank account closed. May pais prezice. Final departure. Andrew frowned. My disappearance hadn't been impulsive. It had been meticulous. He continued reading. I don't want you to look for me with fear, Andrew. I want you to look for me with memory. Every detail I left was a lesson, not revenge. If the cake was on the table, it was so you'd understand there's no celebration without presents. If the house was clean, it was so you'd understand that an empty life can look tidy, but it isn't alive. And if this diary is in your hands, it's because you've already taken the first step. Coming back. Andrew closed his eyes. Every word was a stab. He remembered the dinner at the restaurant, the text he sent me, the silence of my house. It all fit. It all made sense. My God, Mom, he whispered. What did you do? He turned to the last page. At the bottom, a phrase in fresher ink. Don't look for my body. Look for my intention. I am where you never looked. In you. Below that, there was a simple drawing. A piece of cake with a lit candle. And under the drawing, an address written with a steady hand. Hours later, Andrew was on the road, the diary on the passenger seat. He followed the written directions. They led him out of the city, toward the countryside. The drive was long, and every mile was a blow of conscience. When he reached the end of the road, he found himself at an iron gate. A wooden sign hung from one side. Sweet Dawn Home. Foundation for Abandoned Elderly Women. Andrew froze. He walked in slowly. In the garden, a group of women were talking and laughing, and among them, he saw me. I was sitting in a white chair, reading a book, with the yellow flowers I loved so much on the table. His breath stopped. He didn't run to me. He didn't shout. He just watched me, understanding that my disappearance hadn't been an escape, but a rebirth. I looked up and saw him. Our eyes met. There was no blame, no anger, no drama, only truth. I smiled. He took a step forward, trembling. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why?" "Because I needed to teach you what you never wanted to learn," I replied calmly. "That love isn't taken for granted. It's cared for, or it's lost." Andrew fell to his knees. He took my hand. His tears fell on my skin like a belated baptism. I stroked his hair and said in his ear, "Don't worry, son. You're still in time to learn how to celebrate with me, even if I don't need candles anymore." That afternoon, I invited him to stay. We ate cake. Not the old one, but a new one, baked that very morning by the women of the home. "You know," I told him, "this is the only cake that really tastes like life." He smiled through his tears. "And the hardest one to digest." We both laughed, because deep down we both knew that this was the first time in many years that we were eating the same piece of truth. They say the heaviest silences are the ones that come after forgiveness, and I believe it's true. Since that reunion with Andrew, there was a new stillness in the air, something that neither time nor tears could describe. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the path toward it. However, I knew something was missing. I hadn't planned my absence just as an emotional lesson, but also as a declaration of independence. For years, I had lived for others. For my husband first, for my son later, and I had forgotten that I also had a sacred right to decide what I would leave behind when I was gone. That's why, weeks before leaving, I had visited Mark Douglas, the town's lawyer. A serene man, with white hair and a deep voice, with the patience of someone who listens to stories more than cases. I brought him my papers, my savings, my letters. "I want to leave everything in order," I told him, "but I also want what I leave behind to say something." He nodded without questions. "What exactly do you wish, Mrs. Laura?" I looked him in the eye. "I want my son to understand that inheritances aren't measured in assets, but in lessons." I signed documents, sealed envelopes, and kept a copy of everything in my notebook. I knew the day would come. 3 days passed since Andrew found me at the Sweet Dawn home. He came to see me every afternoon, and slowly, the light in his eyes began to change. He no longer talked about his work, or the restaurant, or the plans he used to boast about. He talked to me about simple things, about how he slept better since he heard me laugh, about how the sound of my voice reminded him of Sundays in his childhood, about how, for the first time, he felt like he truly saw me. I listened to him in silence, tenderly. I knew he was sincere, but I also knew that forgiveness isn't built with visits, but with actions. That morning, as we were having coffee in the home's garden, the security guard approached with a letter in his hand. "Mrs. Laura, someone is asking for you," he said. "It's a gentleman from the city. He says he has something important." I recognized him immediately. Mark Douglas. He was accompanied by an assistant and a dark leather briefcase. "Good morning, ma'am," he greeted with a slight bow. "I'm here to fulfill the last part of your request." Andrew frowned. "What request?" I took his hand gently. "It's okay, son, listen first." The lawyer sat across from us and opened his briefcase. He took out a closed envelope, sealed with wax. "This document was signed by your mother 2 months ago. It was only to be delivered when you found her," he said, looking at Andrew intently. Andrew took it with trembling hands. He broke the seal and began to read in a low voice. His face changed. First confusion, then astonishment, then a mix of sadness and relief. I watched him in silence, without looking away. "I, Laura, being of sound mind, declare that all my savings, properties, and belongings will become part of the Sweet Dawn Foundation, an institution dedicated to the care of elderly women in situations of abandonment. My son Andrew will not be excluded from my will, but his inheritance will be different. He will receive my complete diary, my letters, and the right to participate as a volunteer and benefactor in the home. Only when he has completed 1 year of service here will my lawyer be authorized to transfer the remaining assets to him in a joint account with the foundation. This is not a test of distrust, but of love, because nothing teaches more than giving without expecting." Andrew looked up, incredulous. "Mom, why did you do this?" Because I love you, I replied. And love, when it doesn't teach, becomes a habit. Mark closed his briefcase and added, Your mother was very clear. She said the real testament wasn't this document, but the time you decide to spend understanding it. Andrew fell silent. Chloe wasn't there, but I imagined her reaction. Cold, distant, practical. My son, on the other hand, looked small, vulnerable, like that boy who promised me he'd buy me a cake every morning. He stood up and began to walk around the garden. 1 year, he muttered. And if you don't complete it, then nothing will change, I said. The inheritance will stay here, feeding other women who, like me, just wanted to be remembered. His eyes filled with tears. Mom, I don't need money. No, son. You need redemption. The following days were different. Andrew started coming to the home every day. At first he just watched. It was hard for him to get close, but soon he began to help. He carried boxes, served coffee, accompanied the women to their doctor's appointments. The other residents adored him. They called him the founder's son. Sometimes I'd watch him from afar, and my chest would fill with a mix of pride and sadness, because in every gesture, I saw the man I always knew he could be, and who was finally waking up. One afternoon, while we were picking flowers from the garden, he said to me, You know what hurts the most? Not having seen you before. I smiled. Don't blame yourself, Andrew. Some people learn with love, and others only learn when love is gone. And you? Will you leave again? He asked. No. I don't need to disappear anymore. You've already learned how to see. Days later, the lawyer returned with a new document. I'm just here to make it official, he said. Mrs. Laura has decided to renounce any future restitution. Everything remains in the name of the foundation. Andrew signed next to me. I didn't do it as a punishment. I did it for closure. When Mark left, my son hugged me for a long time. I don't care if I don't inherit anything, he whispered. What you left me is worth more than any bank account. And then I knew he had understood. My revenge had turned into a lesson, and the lesson into love. That night, I sat down to write my last entry in the diary. Today I saw my son serve soup to a blind woman. I saw him smile, listen, care, and I understood that the cycle is complete. The cake grew cold, yes, but the love was baked anew. There is no greater inheritance than a heart that awakens. I folded the paper, put it under my pillow, and turned off the light. As sleep overcame me, I heard his voice from the hallway. I love you, Mom. And this time, I knew it wasn't a goodbye, but the beginning of something that, finally, was worth continuing. The sun was streaming through the dining room window of the home when I heard a car stop at the gate. It was almost 10 in the morning. Andrew had already arrived early, as he did every day, to help serve breakfast to the residents. I saw him go out to see who it was, and his face changed. He didn't need to say anything. His expression said it all. Chloe, I whispered. She got out of the car with her dark sunglasses and expensive purse, as impeccable as ever. She walked with that air of superiority she never lost, although a new tension was visible in her movements, as if the weight of what had happened was beginning to bend her pride. Good morning, she said, barely smiling. May I come in? Andrew hesitated, then nodded. I watched from a distance, in silence, my heart beating slowly. Chloe entered with a firm step, looking at everything around her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The women of the home looked at her warily, some with pity. She didn't fit in there. Her perfume was too strong for a place that smelled like soup and soap. She approached me and greeted me with a kiss that didn't touch my cheek. Mrs. Laura, she said, feigning warmth. I'm glad to see you. Well, I didn't respond immediately. I watched her in silence. She had lost weight, and her eyes no longer had their former insolent sparkle. There was something broken behind her words, a crack that not even makeup could hide. I didn't expect to see you here, I told her calmly. Me neither, she replied, but I think we needed to talk. Andrew intervened, uncomfortable. Chloe, Mom has her routine. If you're here to complain about something, now is not the time. She looked at him, hurt. I'm not here to complain, Andrew. I'm here to understand. The three of us sat on the patio. The wind moved the white curtains, and the birdsong mingled with the murmuring of the women knitting nearby. Chloe crossed her legs and took a deep breath. "I'm not going to lie to you, ma'am," she said. "When I found out about the will, I felt betrayed. I thought it was a cruel way to punish us." "And what do you think now?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Now, I think it was a way to open our eyes, but I was late to understand it." Andrew looked at her, surprised. "Late?" Chloe lowered her head. "Ever since you started working here, everything changed. You're not the same. You stay quiet, you think too much. You're not interested in material things. It's like she stole you from me." Andrew took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "She didn't steal me," he said. "She returned me." Chloe flinched. For a moment she seemed to fall apart. "You don't know how much I've cried, Andrew. I couldn't stand the idea of your mother leaving us like that, with nothing, as if we had never been part of her life." "You were never part of my mother's life," he replied sadly. "You never listened to her, or looked at her, and now that you understand what she was worth, you come looking for forgiveness." Chloe looked at me with wet eyes. "Maybe so, maybe that's why I came." Her voice had a tremor I didn't recognize in her. She was no longer the haughty woman who made me feel invisible, but someone lost, vulnerable. "I didn't come for money, ma'am," she continued. "I came because last night I dreamed about you. You were sitting in front of the birthday cake, alone, with the candles lit. And when you blew them out, you looked at me and said, 'There's nothing left to blow for.'" "And what do you think it meant?" I asked. "That time is running out," she replied, her voice breaking. "That what isn't fixed with love, life collects with absence." Andrew stood up, upset. "Chloe, that's enough." But I motioned with my hand. "Let her speak, son." She wiped her tears and looked me straight in the eye. "I was unfair to you. I didn't understand what it meant to be a mother. I thought affection was shown with gifts, not with presents. That the love of children was automatic, eternal. But now I know that love, when taken for granted, dies in silence." "And now that you know, what do you plan to do?" I asked. "Try to repair it," she said firmly. "I don't know how, but I want to try." We sat in silence for a long time. Andrew looked at the ground. I watched her hands, clasped nervously. For the first time, I saw a maturity in my son that he didn't have before, that of someone who knows how to listen without running away. "Chloe," I said calmly, "forgiveness isn't begged for, it's built." "I know," she replied. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to come and help. Maybe cook, clean, whatever." "Out of guilt or out of love?" I asked. "Out of necessity," she said, and her voice cracked. "Because without love, I don't know who I am." I didn't say anything, I just nodded. Andrew looked at me, incredulous. "You're going to let her stay?" "I can't deny her the chance to learn," I replied, "just as I didn't deny it to you." The following days were strange. Seeing Chloe among the women of the home was like seeing a fish out of water. She stumbled, she made mistakes, she spilled soup, but she tried. Andrew watched her without judgment, although the distance between them was obvious. One afternoon, while we were serving tea, Chloe approached me and said, "Now I understand about the cake." "What do you understand, child?" "That sometimes you sit at the table expecting to be served, without realizing the food is already cold." I smiled. "And when it gets cold, what do? You reheat it with humility," she replied. A week later, the lawyer Mark Douglas returned to the home. He brought a smaller envelope. "Mrs. Laura, this is for you," he told me. I opened it. It was a notification. The foundation had been officially recognized under my name. In the letter, a highlighted sentence, "The Sweet Dawn Home has been established in memory of the women who were not heard, but who decided to leave their mark." Andrew hugged me, crying. Chloe did too, in silence. For the first time, the three of us were together, not as a perfect family, but as survivors of the same mistake. That night, while the home slept, Andrew and Chloe stayed in the garden, under the stars. He took her hand and said, "You know, my mother was right. The greatest inheritances aren't inherited, they're learned. And the heaviest guilts aren't forgiven. They're served," she replied, with a half smile. I watched them from my window, in silence, and I knew that, finally, the love I had waited for so long was no longer a debt, but a seed. Because even the flowers that bloom late still blossom, they just need the right sun. A year can seem short to someone who expects nothing, but for me, it was a lifetime. 12 months had passed since that night I blew out the candles alone. 12 months since I decided never to serve a cold meal again. And now, as the aroma of freshly baked cake filled the home, I knew the cycle was complete. The women of the shelter decorated the lounge with yellow flowers and paper ribbons. Some hummed old songs, others simply smiled watching me move among them with a tray of plates. No one there called me Mrs. Laura. They called me Mama Laura, and that name, simple and full of affection, was enough to make me feel alive. That afternoon we would celebrate my 69th birthday, but it wasn't a party like the others. This time there were no luxuries or appearances, just love, real, palpable, shared love. And, for the first time in years, there wasn't a single empty chair. As I placed the cake in the center of the table, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Andrew, with a box in his hands, and Chloe by his side. They had offered to help with the celebration. They both looked different. He was more serene, she was simpler. She had learned to smile without pride. "Can I light the candles?" Andrew asked. "Of course, son," I replied, "but leave one unlit." He looked at me curiously. "Why?" "Because there must always be one light, waiting for someone who hasn't learned to see yet." Chloe looked down, understanding. The silence that followed was soft, as if even the air was listening to us. When the candles were lit, I sat in front of the cake. I didn't make a wish. At my age, wishes no longer ask for things. They ask for peace. Andrew took my hand. "Mom," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "thank you for not giving up on me." "Don't thank me," I replied. "I wasn't perfect either. I just knew how to stay long enough for you to learn how to stay too." Chloe approached, her eyes shining. "I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel small." "Forgiveness, child," I said, smiling, "isn't asked for with words. It's proven with time. And you've already started." The women of the home began to applaud. The sound was warm, enveloping. Someone brought a guitar, another began a song, and while everyone sang, I blew out the candles, one by one. The smoke rose like a sigh. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Afterward, I cut the cake and served the first pieces. To each woman, to each volunteer, to Andrew, to Chloe. When it was my turn, I took a piece and placed it on an empty plate in front of the candle I had left unlit. "And who is that one for?" one of the residents asked. "For the one who hasn't learned how to stay yet," I replied. "Because there is always someone who still needs to understand that love grows cold when it's only served to oneself." Andrew stood up, took the unlit candle, and lit it. "Then let me be the one to light it," he said, "so that it never stays dark again." In that instant, the room burst into applause. Laughter mixed with tears, and music filled every corner. That night, when everyone had gone to sleep, I stayed alone in the kitchen. The cake, reduced to crumbs, rested on the table. I caressed the empty plate and remembered the note I had left that first day. When love is forgotten, the cake grows cold. Now I understood it better than ever. Love doesn't grow cold because of time, but because of a lack of presence. And that night, finally, I was surrounded by presence. I sat down, took a new sheet from my diary, and wrote. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it transforms it. Today, my house is full. My heart is too. Andrew understood. Chloe learned. And I rested. I turned off the light and looked out the window. In the distance, the moon lit the garden where so many tears had fallen, but it didn't hurt anymore. Because the lesson had been served, the cake had been shared, and the love, finally, was warm again. They say mothers don't disappear. They just change form. Some become memories, others become teachings, and the bravest ones become living lessons, like Laura. She didn't leave for revenge or sadness. She left to teach that love cannot be taken for granted, that affection isn't fed with empty words, and that time, when used poorly, also becomes a punishment. Her cake, that simple vanilla and walnut cake, stopped being just a symbol of neglect. It transformed into an offering, a warning, a universal truth. Love, when not shared, grows cold. And when you finally understand this, there is no longer a need to flee, or to complain, or to cry, only to live. Today, Laura is not alone. She is surrounded by voices, by hands that call her Mama Laura, by women who found hope in her. And her son, Andrew, is no longer looking for a material inheritance. He's looking to leave a different mark, one that isn't kept in bank accounts, but in daily gestures. He learned that forgiveness isn't asked for, it's worked for. That affection isn't bought, it's cultivated. And that when a mother teaches without shouting, silence becomes her greatest lesson. Chloe changed too. She no longer looks with arrogance or lives by comparing. She gets up every morning with her apron on, helping in the home's kitchen, learning to care without expecting applause. In her eyes, there is now something that didn't exist before: humility. Every year, when August arrives, a very special birthday is celebrated at the Sweet Dawn home. There are no luxuries, no champagne, no new dresses. Just a simple cake, with one candle lit and one unlit. And when someone asks why one remains unlit, Laura replies with her calm smile. That candle is for anyone who hasn't learned how to stay yet. Then everyone falls silent, because they understand that, sooner or later, we all have a candle to light. And now, dear listener, if this story touched your heart, if it made you think of your mother, your grandmother, or that person who once waited for your call, write to us in the comments what city you're watching from, and tell us, who would you light that waiting candle for? Don't forget to like this video if you believe second chances exist, and subscribe to the channel to continue sharing stories that remind us of what truly matters: love, presence, and the power of forgiveness. Because, in the end, stories don't burn out. They just wait for someone to dare to light the next candle.